Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Here we are once again. I never thought this broadcast would last so long. Tonight's show is being brought to you by the Organic Man Coffee Truck, 4501 McPherson. A stop on by their new hours. They're open from 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day but Sunday, just like Chick-fil-A. If you can't come to Laredo, you can buy their coffee at organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Remember, coffee is fruit juice, and that's good for you, so drink lots. Saturday, August 26th, 2023, from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m., I will be at the 2023 Wonderland UFO Festival, 4522 Fredericksburg Road in San Antonio. It was quite an event last year. This year promises to be even better. The place is air conditioned, the parking is free. All you have to do is walk in and look around. Mark your calendars so you don't forget. I'll be telling about the Laredo incident from 1948. Bill sent me an idea for a show. Back in 1960, there was a TV show called One Step Beyond. They called it a mind bending series. It was hosted by John Newland. He was your guide to the unknown. Based on true supernatural stories and events, the show appealed to the folks that like to watch The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, TV shows like that. I saw several episodes way back when they used to show them on the weekends. We That was back when you had like four TV channels, UHF and VHF, and that was it. And you had to have the aluminum foil on the rabbit ears on your TV so you could catch programs. You can still find One Step Beyond on YouTube if you're interested. Uh, Old TV, it's black and white, but hey, a lot of things from back then were a lot better than they are today. In the episode The Explorer, three men are in the Sahara Desert when their guide tries to run off with their camel. So one of the men shoots him. They discover they're lost and they're just about out of water. As they wander along looking for an oasis or a caravan, another explorer comes wandering along. He tells the others which direction they should go. He knows all about the history of the area, like he's reading it from a book. As they're moving across the desert, this new guy, he starts to get sick, and so the other guys have to carry him. He keeps telling him which direction they need to go and what happened in that place hundreds of years back. Finally, the new guy is so sick he can't walk anymore, and as the head explorer is sitting there talking to him, he vanishes. Poof, gone. He has gotten them close enough to a well so that these three explorers are able to live. Well, the head of the team goes to visit the new guy's family to tell them that their son had saved his life as well as the other two men. He tells them how this young man had just shown up out of nowhere to save the day. The family refuses to believe it because their son had died a year previous. Plus, he'd been bedridden for the last 10 years of his life. The family doctor explains all about how this kid had some kind of a physical ailment and he was not able to walk. The mother of the young man says that her son read all the books about exploring the world and he wanted to explore in his mind. What nobody could explain at the end of the show is that the young guy had died from dehydration while laying in his bed with a jug of water right by his side. One of those unexplained mysteries. According to John Newland, this story was true. Another episode was called The Night of the Kill. A 7-year-old boy gets lost in the woods. The family and the neighbors are out looking. When they find him, he's way up on the side of a cliff. The farmers find huge three-toed footprints in their field. Eventually, the posse sets the woods on fire in order to get rid of this creature. If you follow some of the Bigfoot sighting reports, you'll be familiar with how some kids will tell about a huge hair covered creature that took care of them while they were lost in the woods. Bill said One Step Beyond had some very interesting shows, such as Where Are They, which was a two topic episode that talked about rocks falling from the sky in Chico, California, and also about a man who invented gasoline using water. He vanished before he could tell anybody the secret of his formula. If you like old TV shows, well, check it out. The One Step Beyond, you can find it on YouTube and it's free. You don't have to pay a subscription to watch. In the 1900s, Charles Durand was riding home late one night when his horse came to an abrupt halt. It refused to move, so Charles was sitting there on his horse trying to encourage it to get on down the road. It was late and he wanted to go to bed. As he sat there, he spotted a bright white light coming towards him across the field. As the light got closer, it formed into the body of his deceased wife. She had died a few years previous. The ghost walked up to him and told him not to go to his house. She said it was not safe, and then she vanished. Charles was shocked. Well, if his dead wife came to warn him, he figured he'd best heed her warning. He dismounted and he spent the next several hours waiting for the sun to come up. Once it was light out, Charles continued to his home. As he approached his house, he carefully looked at it. He could see muddy footprints on the porch, and he noticed that one of the windows was open, and he knew that he had closed it before he left. He carefully stepped inside and looked around, and then he spotted a string stretched across the doorway into his bedroom. He went and got his umbrella, carefully pulled on the string, and when he did, there was a shotgun blast from inside the room. Somebody had set up a booby trap loaded with a shotgun shell. Had he come home last night, he would not have seen the string. He would have stepped on the booby trap, and it would have probably killed him. His deceased wife, well, the ghost of his deceased wife, had saved his life, just like the kid in the desert. There have been stories about ghosts interceding on behalf of the living, going back as far as written history. Many came out during the Great War, the war to end all wars, better known as the World War I. French warfare was not invented in the Great War. It was taken to a new level of insanity. Trenches ran in every direction with elaborate underground structures for sleeping or storing equipment. The German trenches were far better built. Some of their latrines had wallpaper in them. The French High Command didn't want their men to make their trenches too nice because the idea was you were supposed to leave the trench and go fight the guys in his own trenches. They didn't want to encourage their soldiers to get comfortable. They wanted them out in no man's land fighting. Ypres, I believe that's how it's spelled, Ypres, is a town in Belgium where from 1914 until 1918, four major battles took place and hundreds of smaller fights, skirmishes. They are guesstimating that around 1 million people died on both sides of the war. Since the town was close to the coast, it was considered to be a strategic location for both sides. Some of the battles lasted for months. December 1915. Second Lieutenant William Speight was in his dugout. Officers had far better accommodations than the enlisted pawns. The lieutenant was thinking about his friend and fellow officer who had died earlier that day. A sniper round had taken him out as the two stood there talking. As Spite was sitting there, his door was pulled open and a second lieutenant walked in. This turned out to be his friend. He looked to be alive. As Spite looked at this other officer, realizing he must be a ghost. The ghost stepped to the center of the dugout and then pointed at the floor. After this unexplainable behavior, the spirit vanished. Spite was convinced he didn't imagine it. He decided to try getting a second witness. Maybe the ghost would come back. Spite invited another officer to his quarters the following night at about the same time. As the two officers were sitting there discussing the day's activities, the door swung open and in came his dead friend. Both men watched as the specter walked to the middle of the room, stopped, and pointed at the ground. After a few seconds, the ghost vanished once more. Not knowing what to do about this weird sighting, Spite got his platoon to dig down right where the ghost had been aiming. About 8 feet down, the men found a tunnel, and the tunnel was packed with explosives. There was a timer set to go off sometime the next day. They were able to defuse this underground explosives. Had the ghost not pointed to that spot on the floor, the entire area would have been vaporized sometime the next day. Tunnels were used by both sides to get in under the other side and blow them up. Uncounted thousands of bodies were torn to pieces and never found as they used these tunnels. After the first few tunnel bombs had gone off, the troops found ways to scout out the dirt under their feet. One way was to pound a board into the dirt a few feet and then listen. The vibrations from digging would resonate up from below. As long as the board vibrated, they knew that the bomb was not going to go off. As soon as the sound stopped, that's when you would evacuate the area. To make the tunnels harder to find, one side or the other would fire cannon barrages to disguise the tunneling sounds. Some of these barrages would go on for weeks. In April 1917, Corporal Will Bird of the 42nd Battalion, Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, was sleeping in his dugout near Vimy Ridge. In the darkness, somebody grabbed him by the shoulders. Bird woke thinking this was one of the sentries. He rolled over and looked to see who it was and was surprised to see his brother walking away towards the opening. A bird got up and followed his brother, thinking how strange it was, seeing as his brother had died the year before during a gun battle. The ghost led Bird away from the dugout. Bird kept following, wondering why he was seeing his dead brother. Maybe this was just a dream, a very real dream with bad smells and cold weather. The ghost led him quite a distance from the underground shelter. After a few minutes, the ghost vanished, didn't say a word. The corporal looked around, thinking this had been a wasted trip. He began walking back along the trench. A German shell came crashing down and exploded right on top of the dugout, killing everyone inside. Corporal Bird had survived because his dead brother had drawn him far enough away to avoid the explosion. You know how I like to get off the subject. This is a ghost story, but nobody got saved by the spirit. April 21st, 1943, during Tunisia's Battle of Longstop Hill, the British 38th Royal Tank Regiment went up against the German tanks. A Tiger 131 was hit in the turret ring, making it impossible to maneuver the main gun. The gun was jammed. Then the driver and the front gunner were both injured. The second shot hit the turret's lifting lug. The third shot hit the loader's hatch and it sent fragments inside the turret. The Tiger was still drivable and it was shipped to England so they could study it and see how best to overcome the enemy. About 1,350 Tiger tanks were produced. Most of them were destroyed either in battle or right at the end of the war. The Tiger was turned over to a museum at the end of the war. Tiger 131 was not only salvaged, it was kept in operating condition. Late at night, the folks working in the museum would report seeing a man dressed in a German uniform walking around the tank. Sometimes they would see him climbing in or out of the top hatch. Looking into these sightings, the workers found out that a dead German soldier had been found inside the tank when it was captured. The ghost was dubbed Herman the German. In the movie Fury that came out 2014, Tiger 131 was used. That was a real, genuine Tiger tank from World War II. The the tank was taken well care. They took very good care of the tank, making sure that nothing happened to it while the filming crew had it. I wonder what the ghosts might have thought, seeing as they were now fighting Sherman tanks only in Europe, because Tiger 131 had only been used in Africa. Members of the museum staff went with the Tiger so that when the filming crew was using it, they didn't break anything. It was not allowed to drive in the mud. What they did was they had a huge concrete pad poured, and then they put mud on top of the concrete so it looked like they were running around in a field in Europe. And now for my rant. Being a tanker, there are a few things about the movie that just weren't right. When Tiger 131 spotted the convoy of Sherman tanks, the TC, that's the tank commander, would have focused on Fury first. That would have been the first shot. The M4 tank was equipped with a 75 millimeter main gun. Fury, if you watch the movie closely, you'll notice had a muzzle brake. That's that object on the end of the main barrel, which showed that the Fury tank had a 76 millimeter main gun. Bigger gun, more impact when it was fired. The Tiger TC would have taken out the best American tank first and then picked off all the others at his leisure. Also, no matter how green the crew was, they would never have left their hiding place until after all of the tanks had been destroyed. Only if they were about to be overrun would a tank pull out of its position like that. You don't leave cover unless you have to. Now, also, another thing that didn't happen that should have, the TCs on the Sherman tanks should have fired white phosphorus, better known as Willie Pete, into the hull or the turret of the Tiger. This wouldn't damage the tank one bit, but it would envelope the entire tank in a cloud of white phosphorus smoke. You can't breathe that stuff. It would have incapacitated the crew and it would have blinded them so they couldn't shoot at the Sherman tanks. That's just one of those things. You watch a movie and it's like, well, if I was there, I would have done things this way. That's my rant for the day. Dolly Parton, the singer, is being watched over by spirits of her deceased grandmother. Parton was in Salt Lake City about to board a plane. We could say she was fixin' to get on a plane, but a lot of my listeners wouldn't know what the heck that meant. She was fixin' to. Anyway, as she's walking to the jetway, she saw her grandmother standing in the corner. Her grandmother had been dead for years. So this really got Parton's attention. Growing up in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, Parton was no stranger to the spirit world. Long before I started writing or doing podcasts, I would ask people if they believed in ghosts. Just about everybody from the North States said they did not, and they thought that anyone who did was crazy. The people from the South mostly either believed in ghosts or they had stories of their own about seeing one. Now, there were a few folks from the North who believed in ghosts and a few from the South that didn't. But mostly there was a dividing line running mostly along the North and South states, as in during the Civil War. For some odd reason, people that grew up in the South have a more uh, believe in ghosts more than people in the North. Martin looked at this ghost standing there looking back at her, and she heard it say, "Don't catch the plane." She came to a decision right then and there. Something was wrong. What, she didn't know. But she went to the ticket counter and changed her flight to a later one. The plane she had been about to board crashed, killing everyone. Now, you might think Parton should have said something to someone. Now, think about it. What could she have said? I saw my dead grandmother telling me to not get on that plane, so you should ground it. The ghost had said, "Don't catch the plane." It didn't say there was going to be a crash. Parton had no idea why. She just went with her gut feeling that she should take another flight. It's a good thing she did. The gray man of Pawleys Island has been seen by many people. Anyone who sees the gray man will immediately pack their bags and head to the mainland. The ghost comes to warn people of an impending bad hurricane. Back in the early 1800s, a man was working aboard a sailing ship. He'd been away from home for most of the year, and he was in a hurry to get home to his fiancée. Not thinking about any dangers, he took a shortcut through the swamp, and instead of getting home, he wound up dying in the swamp. Months later, his fiancée was walking along the beach when she encountered her dead fiancé. He told her that she had to go to the mainland to avoid a coming storm. She heeded his warning, took her family off the island. The storm wiped out most of the buildings on the island. The 1900s hurricane that hit Galveston has also left behind a ghost. There's a nun who was in charge of the local orphanage. The hurricane came in, surprising everyone. As the orphanage was slowly collapsing, the nun tied all the kids together with rope and tried to lead them to safety. You can't walk in a bad hurricane. A 150-mile-an-hour wind that is carrying all manner of debris and trash, that's a recipe for disaster. The cleanup party found the bodies of the nun and her charges still tied together. She had tried, but it was just impossible to save these kids. Today, if you see a nun wearing an old style habit, this means a bad storm is coming into the island. It's as if the spirit of the nun is still trying to save anyone she can. Christmas Eve, 2016, Jane was sound asleep when something woke her. The bed covers were pulled back, and something began to shake her. Coming out of a deep sleep, it took a few seconds to realize there was something wrong. The shaking had stopped, but the sound of crying could be heard from the next room. Jane jumped up and ran to check on her kids. The youngest boy was choking on something. His face was already blue. She grabbed the boy and cleared his airway. For those of you that don't know, if the child is small enough, you hold them with their face down, head lower than the body, and lightly hit them between the shoulder blades. The vibration will cause the airway blockage to clear. It works. I've done it. As soon as the child could breathe, he began to scream. This is one of the few times a crying kid is a good thing. Once the emergency was over, Jane got to wondering about A, what had woke her up, and B, why did she hear crying if her oldest son was still asleep and the younger one had a complete obstructed airway? You can't cry with an obstructed airway. Asking around, Jane discovered that 50 years previous, a family had been living in the same house. One of their children had died in the same room that her sons were now using. The ghost of the long ago mother must have seen what was happening and went and warned Jane. In Vietnam, a patrol had gone out to the brush to look for the enemy. They carefully walked the trail they were to use, moving far from the semi safety of their base. Things can get bad really fast. The patrol ran into a superior force. The firefight was a non starter. Outnumbered and outgunned, the patrol ran as fast as they could. As the sun was going down, the squad leader got his men into a position where just maybe they could survive. Exhausted, scared, and in grave danger, the men tried to look in every direction to see the enemy before they saw them. All eyes and ears were on full alert. You listened for brush being moved, and you looked for darker shapes moving against a black background. The jungle was filled with enemy soldiers, all looking for this patrol. Without anyone seeing or hearing him, a captain suddenly appeared in their midst. One minute they were together, trying to stay alive, and the next they had an extra man. The captain got in close to the squad leader and whispered that he and his men were to follow him. And then the captain began to crawl through the brush. Well, the squad followed the officer. He wasn't following any trail, but mostly just making one as he went. It took way too long, but the soldiers eventually were able to get to their feet and move a bit quicker. After a few hours, the squad saw their base ahead. The captain led them to the gate and ushered the squad into the safer location. At some point in their travels, the squad leader had gotten a pretty good look at this captain, and he'd seen his name tapes. The squad leader reported to his platoon leader and gave his report. The platoon leader wanted to know who this captain was that had saved his men. He got to asking around the base. After making several inquiries, the platoon leader was told that this captain had been killed in a firefight months ago. The squad had been saved by a ghost. YouTube is a constant source of annoyance and misinformation. They show some things that are said to be true, and any research will find that the video is either fake or it's based on an untrue story. I've seen some that they're pulled from movies, but the people making the video claim it's an actual event. Then again, there are also some videos that you just can't get a handle on. One such video comes from a CCTV camera on a street corner. There's no information on when or where it was taken. Sometime in the evening, a young girl is walking towards a four-lane street. Two cars are coming along, and so she stops and waits on the curb. The first car stops, so the young girl walks into the street. The second driver doesn't seem to notice her, and he's almost on top of her when suddenly a shadowy form coming from behind the girl picks her up and carries her across the street, narrowly avoiding a bad accident. The second car stops, and the occupants of both cars jump out looking around. It looked like it takes them both several seconds to realize that this girl is now 25 feet away. The girl seems confused as well. She's looking around, trying to figure out what just happened. I watched this video several times. It looks real. I don't have the time or the equipment to dissect the video frame by frame, but I didn't see any splicing. As the girl is being sped across the street, the car is smoothly coming to a stop. There's no jumps in the video. The shadowy person that saved the day is just a blur until reaching the right-hand curb. Then it turns into a man who simply walks away as if nothing had happened. If this was fake, you have to ask, why? The person who posted it didn't take credit for the video. It looks just like any CCTV that are on street corners everywhere. A lot of the comments said this was some form of a miracle. If so, why? Lots of people get run over every day. Is there something special about this one girl, or is the shadow just happened to be there at the right time and did the right thing? The video is called Ghost Man Saves Little Girl's Life, but there's no other information. If I had to guess, I would say it's from a country in the East. I did find reference to the video in a newspaper from India, but they might have just been reposting it. Now, the scene reminds me of a book I read called Heroes Are Us, written by Mainak Dar. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Mainakdhar. I found it quite enjoyable. The story takes place in India, and some of the terminology is a little hard to follow, but if you get a chance, give it a read. It's quite a story. I could find no connection between the book and the video. As far as I know, they're not making it into a movie. They should. However, if Hollywood gets their hands on it, they'd probably ruin the story. But it was an interesting book, and like I said, you should check it out. Heroes Are Us, just like Toys R Us, by Manik Dar. Quite a story. He's written a couple of books, but I think that one was his best. An ambulance was called for late one night. The man calling said there was something wrong and he needed medical assistance. When the unit arrived, they knocked at the door and they rang the bell. The door was locked, but after a few seconds, a man opened the door and said the person in distress was in the bedroom. The paramedics went to the room and they found a man laying on the floor. He was having a heart attack. His pulse was very weak and rapid. They got him on oxygen and they sped to the hospital. As they worked on keeping the man alive, it dawned on one of the medics that the guy on the stretcher looked exactly like the guy who'd answered the door. He figured it must have been his twin brother. Once at the hospital, all the paperwork had to be filled out, and it turned out that the man lived alone and he didn't have a brother. The paramedics went back and they listened to the original call. The voice was that of the man they had just dropped off at the hospital. It would seem the ghost of the dying man had called for an ambulance and then it had unlocked the door for the crew. In 1994, Christine and her 3-year-old son were driving along a California highway when she fell asleep and ran off the road. The car landed at the bottom of a 40-foot deep ditch, where it was nearly impossible to be seen. Christine was killed in the impact, but her son was still alive in his child seat. Days later, Deborah and her husband were driving along the same highway when they saw a body laying on the side of the pavement. Oh, they immediately called the sheriff's department, who dispatched a deputy. The deputy arrived, but he saw no body or any indication there had been one there. No body, no blood, no clothing. Well, looking closer at the side of the road, the deputy saw wheel marks. He slid down the bank into the ditch and he found Christine's car. She was beyond saving, but her son was still alive. Deborah and her husband both identified the body as being the dead woman they'd seen laying in the road, even though she was still seatbelted into her car. Since she'd been killed on impact, her spirit must have moved to the side of the road to attract rescuers for her son. NASCAR would be a lot more exciting if half the cars went in the other direction. They don't run the old figure eight track anymore. Too many accidents. Now that was exciting and dangerous. Uh, Still, an oval track can be exciting for all the wrong reasons. The cars crash all the time, and on a few occasions, people have lost their lives. You should know who Dale Earnhardt is. He was killed in a crash at Daytona Beach in 2001. A lot of folks had the number 3 with a halo or wings or both on their Facebook pages, and they had t shirts with the same image, a number 3 with a halo. That was his vehicle number. Now, you might know who Dale Earnhardt Jr. is. He followed in his father as well as his grandfather's footsteps. 2004, while practicing at the Sonoma Raceway in California, Dale Jr. was involved in a fiery crash. He was also driving car number 3 when another vehicle hit him and sent his car into the wall where it burst into flames. Dale couldn't get out. He said he was trapped in the wreckage. As he struggled to get his seatbelt off, someone grabbed him from behind and drug him from the flames. Once out of the danger zone, Dale felt himself being dropped to the pavement. The crash crew arrived and they loaded Dale into an ambulance and they extinguished the flames. Once he was recovering at the emergency room, Dale Jr. asked his crewmen to find the guy that had saved his life. He wanted to thank him. The crewman said there was nobody at the burning car before the crash crew arrived and that Dale must have gotten out on his own. Dale Jr. swears he was pulled from the car. He could feel arms wrapped around his chest. After thinking about it, he came to the conclusion that this must have been the spirit of his father. Melbourne, Australia has a number of haunted locations. Point Ormond is a high bluff over the village of Elwood, which is part of Melbourne now. In 1840, there was a quarantine station at the point, as well as a graveyard. Can't have one without the other. Today, they have a memorial built in their place. Folks go there to look out over Port Phillip. People report seeing a ghost of a young boy who was helpful on at least one occasion. A woman who'd taken her son to the point, as she sat on one of the benches, she kind of dozed off. A boy dressed in old style clothing woke her, saying that she should get her son away from the edge. She called her son to come to her, and just seconds before the ground collapsed right where he had been standing. No one knows who this ghost boy might be, since records were lost over time and the cemetery has been moved to another location. Built in 1888, the Fairmont Banff Spring Hotel is considered haunted by some of the staff. Uh, that is to say, some of the staff members are still at their jobs years after passing on. They found a secret room in 1926, and they also found another room that had been bricked up that is supposed to have been the scene of a murder. Sam Macaulay was a genial old Scotsman who was the head bellman from the 60s and the 70s. Sightings of him have been circulating around the hotel since his passing in 1975. Sam is considered quite a helpful spirit, and most of the stories involving him are about how he either helped someone with some needed mission or he gave them information, like where can I get a meal at 2 o'clock in the morning. Two elderly women were staying at the hotel and they called the bell desk asking for assistance. They discovered their key would not unlock the door. The regular bellman was busy with other duties and he didn't get there until 15 minutes after they had called. When he arrived, he found that the two women were in their room. One of the women said that an older bellman, wearing a plaid jacket matching Sam's description, had shown up and helped them get the door open. Other stories include guests seeing Sam in his old office, which was converted to a guest room on the main floor. Having a ghost come to your aid with a key or advice is one thing. Imagine getting a ride and some money from a ghost. Aristoteles Savalas, a telly to his friends, well, and everybody else, was born on January 21st, 1922. He became an actor who was best known for always playing a tough guy. Back when I was in the 49th Armor Division, my favorite movie was Kelly's Heroes. In fact, it's still kind of one of my favorite movies. I have a copy of it on the shelf here. He always played a tough guy, and in the Kelly's Heroes, he played the part of Big Joe. He was the sergeant in charge of the guys that went to steal the gold. I didn't include this movie when I was talking about cheesy movies because it wasn't. This was one of the better made movies ever, even though it was a combination action war movie with humor mixed in. Now, things like when Oddball buys the Germans' tank and their uniforms. About half of the actors in the movie had been in the military, including the German TC, Karl Otto Alberti, who was in the German army after the war. Savalas also served in the United States Army from 1943 to 46. He received a Purple Heart, which means he bled for his country. Very little is known about his time in the Army because his records were lost in a fire. Savalas used to host a radio show called Coffee House, which I had to include because you know how I am about coffee. Years before Telly Savalas acting somebody always does that every time I'm doing the show. And I always forget to turn my notifications off. Anyway, Telly Savalas was out on a date one night when he ran out of gas. This was 1959. He was on Long Island in the middle of nowhere. Somebody wasn't paying attention to their gauges. Sitting on the side of the road, he discovered that there were no houses around and all the stores nearby were closed. The only option, which you can't have one option, but his one, the only thing he could do was walk several miles to a gas station, get some gas, and then walk back. As he's walking along the side of the road, Telly hears a voice, high pitched voice next to him, asking if he needed a ride. Turning, he saw an old man sitting in a Cadillac, wearing a white suit. Looked like Colonel Sanders. To his surprise, the man was there to give him a lift. What he didn't understand was if a car had been coming up behind him, he should have seen the headlights. He should have heard the car approaching from behind, but he didn't. Just suddenly, there was the car. Well, you've heard the saying, never look a gift horse in the mouth. Or how about beware of Greeks bearing gifts, or gifts bearing Greeks? They all came from the same incident, the Trojan Wars. Savalas was Greek. Not wanting to walk so far late at night, Savalas said that yes, he could use a ride, and so he jumped into the car. On the drive to the gas station, the driver began talking about the Red Sox ball player that he knew, and he gave Telly Savalas the name. This comment was way out of context, but, you know, you listen to what the driver is saying. Once they get to the gas station, Telly discovers he doesn't have any money. He'd spent all of his cash on his date. Well, the driver handed him a buck and said, go ahead and buy some gas. And gas was a lot cheaper back then. It was 20 cents a gallon. Savalas told the man to give him his address and he would get him the money back as soon as he could. The driver wrote down his phone number and his address on a piece of paper and handed it over. The pair then drove back to where Savalas had left his car. The driver hung around waiting to be sure that he got the car started. The next day, as he was coming home from work, Savalas saw a newspaper that said the Red Sox ball player the driver had been talking about was found dead in some mysterious circumstances. Telly thought this was pretty darn weird, and he mentioned it to his mother when he got home. He then called the phone number so he could return the money from the other night. The phone was answered by a woman, and Telly asked to speak to James Cullen. The woman said he was not available. So Telly asked when he could get with the man, and he was told that Cullen had been dead for 2 years. Well, Telly tried to explain that he'd gotten a ride from this man, and the woman hung up. Telly really wanted to return the money, and he was really curious as to what was going on, so he called her back. And she hung up on him again. And he called her back again because it was really, really bothering him. Finally, she agreed to allow him to come to the home and give her the dollar. When he showed up, he explained to her what had happened. He even showed her the note that the man had given him. The handwriting looked like that of her dead husband. When Telly Savalas was talking to this woman, he mentioned how the ghost had a high pitched voice. The woman said, no, my husband had a deep voice. Well, finally, the question came up as to how he died, and it turned out that James had shot himself in the throat, committed suicide. Perhaps that was why the voice of the ghost was high pitched. Telly Savalas said that this incident gave him shivers every time he thought about it, and he thought about this a lot. Ever heard the song The Ride by David Allan Coe? It's kind of like that. Telly Savalas died January 22nd, 1994, the day after his birthday. He was 72. What a lot of folks didn't know about Telly Savalas, he had a brother who was also an actor, Georgios Demetrius Savalas. If you watched the movie Kelly's Heroes, the artillery guy, Mulligan, who was sleeping with a gold bar held up to his head, well, that was Telly's brother George. He was also in the TV show Kojak. He played the part of Detective Stavros. He was the big guy with all the black hair, as opposed to Telly Savalas, who had no hair. Knockers were described as small men who worked alongside the miners in the mines. These creatures were known to be mischievous, but they were also sometimes beneficial. They would steal people's food, their lunches. They would steal any tools that were left laying around. Sometimes they would snuff out a miner's helmet light, uh, all in the name of a good time. On occasion, these creatures would knock on the walls of the tunnel, letting the miners know that there might be a collapse coming soon. That's where they got the name knockers. The legend of the Tommyknockers was brought to the U.S. in the 1820s by Welsh and Cornish immigrants who came to Pennsylvania to look for coal. They believed the Tommyknockers were spirits who dressed like the miners, and they even worked in the mines alongside them. Tommyknockers were very important to Cornish and Welsh miners to a point that they would refuse to work in a mine unless the company assured them that there were Tommyknockers in the mine. The mine owners would announce the Tommyknockers are on duty, and this would get the men to go down into the ground. Stories of Tommyknockers quickly spread across the United States. Both friend and foe tales of Tommyknockers were used to explain anything that couldn't be explained. If a miner's light went out, they were stranded in total darkness. It was a trick being played by the Tommyknockers. If a group of tools went missing or your lunch disappeared, that was the Tommyknockers. However, if a miner narrowly escaped a cave in, that was also them. As the legend spread, miners came to believe the Tommyknockers were the spirits of dead miners who were warning their fellow miners of impending danger. Miners would often leave offerings of food and other items to express gratitude to these creatures, also to keep them on your good side. If your wife made you a sandwich or a piece of cake or something, you would break off a portion of it and leave it in the mine for these spirits. So strong was the belief in the Tommyknockers that miners would include them in their strikes. In 1956, the owners of a large mine in California sealed the entrance to the mine during the strike. A group of miners circulated a petition demanding that the owners open the entrance so that the Tommyknockers can get out. The owners complied. Occasionally, visitors to abandoned mines say that they hear strange sounds from inside. They say it sounds like somebody striking the side of the mine with a shovel, knocking on the rock. About 200 years ago, there were 7 miners working in the hills of Smokeshire at a gold mine when they heard tapping sounds coming from deep in the mine. Instead of heeding the warning, 3 of the miners decided that this was just nonsense. Tommyknockers, they're not real. and they started making fun of the spirits making that sound. Well, four of the miners, they're like, oh shoot, it's the Tommy knockers. They grabbed their stuff and they left, leaving these three men behind. As they were exiting the mine, these four men all swore they saw the Tommy knockers. Shortly after they got out of the mine, it collapsed, killing the three men that had ridiculed the spirits. Legend has it that the Tommyknockers haunted the Mamie R mine, which was located near Cripple Creek, Colorado. These particular spirits were not the kind hearted pranksters, but the miners all believed that these things were evil. Other miners who were less superstitious that tried to work the Mamie R mine, hoping to get rich, ran into nothing but trouble. One man was convinced that he heard the voice of a boy who had gotten lost down in the tunnel. He went down to search for the child, and the ceiling collapsed, killing him. Another death happened when a bucket fell and crushed a miner's skull. A bucket in a mine is not a little metal container, it's a big thing. Well, the bucket fell and crushed his skull. After these deaths, miners reported seeing the ghosts of these two men down in the mine. Now, there were also reports of them hearing whispering and seeing odd shapes moving around. The miners who believed it was the Tommyknockers who were causing all the tragic deaths decided they'd had enough and they simply refused to enter the mine, and it was closed in 1895 for good. The Crescent Mine in Sumter, Oregon is a well known hot spot for Tommyknockers. This was the mine featured in the TV show Ghost Mine that ran for two seasons in 2013 and 2014. The folks in Hollywood had to throw a twist into the show by adding Christine Lumen, a redhead, to the cast. Having a woman underground or even near a mine is considered bad luck, even today. In the coal region in central Appalachian Mountains, passing a red haired woman on the way to the mine is considered a bad omen, bringing about death. Somebody keeps sending messages. The actual miners were superstitious, and having Lumen in the camp as well as underground just added to their tension. Dick Secord Jr., who they called Graybeard on the show, he was the guy that would take samples and tell them how much gold was in the rock. Well, he used to talk about the Tommyknockers all the time during the show. Sumter, Oregon was once a booming mine town until a fire destroyed the mine in 1917. With a number of unexplained tragedies that happened in the mine, it received a bad reputation for being haunted, and this led to it being closed. It was reopened during the Ghost Mine series, and then the owners sold it, and nothing is being done with it today. I liked that show, even though it was terribly Hollywoodized, but still it had some redeeming qualities. A lot of people are afraid of ghosts. I've talked to some people, I've asked if they've ever seen a ghost, and they get scared just talking about having seen a ghost, not that they've seen one. I'll ask them if they've seen a ghost, and they'll back up with a shocked look on their face, like, oh no! They don't even want to hear the word. I don't know why. Other people who have had encounters with ghosts consider it a good thing, especially these people that the ghost has helped out. You got to ask yourself, how do you know if you've ever seen a ghost or not? The time my wife and I saw a ghost, we thought it was a real live person until he disappeared. So in your as you're going through life, you may have encountered a ghost at some point and you just didn't know it. Next time you're walking down the street and you see somebody, once you pass them, turn around, look back, see if they've disappeared or not. Give you something to think about late at night when you're trying to sleep. Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, let your friends know what they're missing. If you want to buy a t-shirt or a coffee cup or something like that, you can find my stuff at tpublic.com. Just look for Strange Things with Chris James. If you'd like to buy a book or two, you can find all my books at amazon.com, or some of them are available at the Organic Man Coffee Trike. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things. And if you'd like, you can hum the exit music now.